My name is Aryavan. I want to just give a few more words of introduction. I grew up, as Surjo said, in the Ananda community in Palo Alto. My father was a Kriyaban, but also my mother. She came and met Swamiji in 1970, 71. So she was there in the really early days, or 72. And she lived back when Ananda was just the meditation retreat. She was there. And then she met my father, both at Ananda. And they ended up having me when they were living in San Francisco House, which was an Ananda community in the San Francisco Bay Area. Moved down to Palo Alto when that community was founded, so that's where I was raised. And I went to the Living Wisdom School there, which was then called the Ananda School, for 9 years. I was the first graduate of that school. So every year they made a new, level just for me. No, I know. I deserve it. So, no, there were other people too. Or else it would have been a very small, somewhat boring school. Then, years later, after I went to high school and college in more traditional schools, my high school was a Catholic school in the area, and my college was actually a public school. It was the first public school I went to. Then I ended up getting hooked by Swamiji. I went and saw a talk of his in Spiritual Renewal Week, and I, to this day, don't know why I went, but something called me. And I went, and I saw him speak, and he said the youth should go to India. That's all I remember. I don't remember what the subject was or anything, but the young people should go to India. So I decided I would go to India. And a year later of college and living a completely, thoroughly unspiritual life, I still had this idea that I needed to go to India. And so I came here, I landed in Pune, I met Surjo. When Swamiji came, I met Narayani, and I became his videographer because somebody heard that I had a degree in film, which is what I studied in college. It was a very whirlwind courting, I like to say. It was Divine Mother through Swamiji calling me to another life, and I fell in love. So here I am. Towards the end of his life, Swamiji started saying to different people, really to a lot of people, really anyone he could find at the end, Brian, which was my name at the time, should be a teacher. He should be in education. And so from that moment, I was still his videographer. He said, not yet, I still need you as a videographer, but soon you'll be a teacher. And after he left the body, I still had some video things that were happening. The answer happened, and so I was helping with that. It's actually where I met my wife, Ishani. Since we were the only two people from the village working on there, we were very close. We made a little super bubble of joy. And then we became married. But then after that, we decided to settle at Ananda Village where she was living, and at the same time, the director of the school there said, I heard that Swamiji said that you are supposed to be a teacher, so let's start. And so I did. And I taught there for 4 years. I've been teaching there for 4 years. I'm obviously not teaching at this moment. We're taking a year off to be taught by the universe for a moment, and then I may find myself back in the school there or somewhere else. There's still a lot of things. I'm leaving to Divine Mother right now. But that's sort of how I got to in front of you. I would like to say just quickly that just like rock musicians say wherever city they go that this is my favorite place, but Mumbai really is so far my favorite place. So, I mean, it's amazing. There's so much light here, and I'm really grateful to be here. So, education for life. Why? For me, the idea behind education for life actually starts in the stars. And it starts with Sri Yukteswar. Education has been important to many great spiritual teachers. We actually were just on pilgrimage some time ago, earlier in this month, and we went to the house of Baduri Mahashaya, you may remember from autobiography. And I had no idea, but education was very important to him. And the only organization he started was a school. to instruct children, and only left the school, I mean in the hands of someone else, when he found that it was distracting him from his spiritual progress. He had gotten to the point where he needed 100% focus, unlike the 99.9% focus that we're all able to give, right? Me too. So also for Master, it was the same. But I actually want to go back and give a little context, because education for life is, in some ways, a revolution. But in other ways, it's actually really obvious. And when you hear me speak about it, you might start thinking, well, this is actually like really clear. This is, of course, what you should do. But I want to explain a little bit about why it isn't that way, why we've come into a world where things have ended up the way they are. And it all starts with Sri Yukteswar. Coming to India, I grew up at Ananda, so I was very familiar with, or at least a little familiar with the idea of the yugas. And I took it for granted because when you grow up with something, it just is the way it is. So I knew that it used to be Kali Yuga, and now it's Dwapara Yuga. And even on our newsletters at Ananda Palo Alto, it'll, instead of giving the year 1998, it'll say 298 Dwapara. Like, we're very committed to the idea that we're in Dwapara Yuga, and we want everyone to know. Even though most of the people who see it in America don't know what that means. But we still go for it. So Sri Yukteswar did the revolutionary thing of basically calling out the ancient calculations for Kali Yuga, saying, actually, we are not only is Kali Yuga not going to last for 400,000 years, but we aren't even in it anymore. We are already heading into this age of energy. So Kali Yuga, we have energy that isn't really even a concept, right? What you see is what you get. This is physical, this is real, this is all that matters, and that's why we have to go into caves and renunciate in order to find God, because you have to completely reject the material in order to understand that there is God behind it. Dwapara Yuga comes along and says, actually, everything is energy, everything is God, and you can find God wherever you are. And that's, as we know, a revolutionary concept. Even today, I sort of thought coming to India that maybe it would be clearer. I mean, you look all around you at the signs of Dwapara Yuga. I mean, telephones, cell phones, internet, everything around us is so clearly working on a vibration of energy. It actually is a little bit, well, surprising to me that there could still be a large group in the world who thinks that we're still in a dark age. However, if you read a newspaper, you start to feel more compassion because you see everything that's going on. And you're like, okay, so if I was really just looking at that, I could understand that this is a dark age. But in fact, we're moving into this light age, and we're moving, you know, we have those periods of time on the sides of the yugas, the transitional periods. And so when modern education, as we know it today, was conceived, it was conceived in what essentially was the very end of Kali Yuga. It was in the time, basically what we have, before we had the economics to have education, you grew up with your family and you learned their trade and you did their trade. And really, since you were a young child, you would just do whatever your parents were doing because there was no other option. There was not the means to produce enough that you couldn't just, you had to work all the time, and everyone in the family had to be on board. With the Industrial Revolution, we get to the point where you now have the means of production to make more things with less energy. And all of a sudden, people as children don't have to work, and people have this luxury they haven't had before, really, which is like free time. It's a lot of why we're able to pursue the spiritual path now. It's what a lot of what Yogananda brought was something that fits into life, because now we have the free time. So many people fill that time with distraction, but we've decided we want to fill that time with God, but it wasn't always that way. And so children weren't allowed to learn in the way that we learned. They learned from their parents, they learned, maybe they were lucky to have a spiritual teacher in their lives, but it wasn't a focus of their life. Then we get to the Industrial Revolution. All of a sudden, people have the ability to make more with less. And children don't necessarily have to work, although it was still the case that they would often work. But we were starting to move into this time when we had to figure out, also population boom. We have all these people now that are entering what is now becoming a workforce. This is the first time we thought of it. And now we need some way of making sure that they all know enough so that we don't have to start from scratch every time. So the idea of education in that sense, an institutional education, is born. And in that time, the purpose was, in the Industrial Revolution, where were the workers needed?
Factories.
Factories. They were needed in factories, so the system of education that was conceived then was built to train children to work in factories, to be able to work. Even, I don't know if you have the same thing as we have in America, but we have bells when the class is over. There's a loud bell that goes, the bell is there. That bell is straight out of the whistle from a factory, you know? When it's time, work's done, they blow the whistle, it's like, okay, now I can go. They were even preparing children on the subtlest levels, maybe without realizing it, because, you know, you're thinking, I need a system that's going to let everyone know what time it is. Oh, the factories have one, I'll just use that. So it's not to say, everything I'm saying about education, we'll say in this class, is not to say that it's all on purpose. It's not a purposeful like negligence. It's something I want to show that has come very logically just from an old time, and that now that we're actually in Dwapara Yuga, now that we're actually in a time when we can really see, literally we know that this is not solid. I mean, I have not seen the atoms in it, but I know that this is actually mostly space, and this is mostly space, and everything around me is actually mostly empty. It's mostly God, actually. But they are not quite at that point scientifically. But now that we know that, we have this space where we can say, okay, what can we do differently? How can we actually prepare children for the future? Because that's the point of education, right? It's to prepare children for their future. We want our children to be able to be successful, to be happy, to be well-rounded, all of the above. The problem is that the education system we've inherited is coming from a time on some level that is not in tune with that idea. The idea that you would need to be, well, for one, happy. Another thing that happens in Dwapara Yuga is speed, right? Things are moving really, really fast. You only have to take 2 steps outside to see everything is going at full speed all the time, especially in Mumbai, but also around the world. Everything is just on like fast motion, and it's only probably going to get more fast. And so we need tools in order to cope with that. But it's also a matter of what are the jobs going to look like in the future? You know, everyone's saying in America right now, we have to teach our kids to code. We have to teach them to code. Everything is all about getting code into the classrooms, which is good because there are a lot of things in code. But code didn't exist 20 years ago in the way that we know it now. What's it going to be like in 20 years? So we're in this loop where we're always trying to play catch up with education because we're looking at the material. We're not looking at the energy. So we're like, okay, there's jobs in computer programming right now. Let's train everyone to be computer programmers. Problem being, computers, I mean, who knows? They might be on our skin by the time that our children are actually in college. They might be implanted in our eyes, or Google Glass, or some other crazy thing that I can't even think of. So if we concentrate only on the material, we'll train our children for jobs that no longer exist. And so the question is, how do you prepare children for something you don't know is coming? How do you prepare your children for tomorrow? I brought a list that I want to read from. This is, so in the West, and maybe it's true in India too, just because of how everywhere I go, it's the same. You know, people dress a little different, people speak different languages, but nowadays, wherever you go, when I'm in Mumbai, I feel like I could be in America. When I'm in America, I feel like I could be in Mumbai. It's all becoming one planet. And so this is a list from one of the most respected companies in America, Google. Maybe you've heard of them. They are taking over everything. But they also do something that's really interesting to me, and it actually is getting really popular, especially in Silicon Valley, where Ananda Palo Alto is in the heart of. It's a place of constant innovation. They're always looking for ways to change the paradigm, to raise the energy, to figure out problems. It's actually an amazing place for yogis. And that's why Palo Alto is like a perfect place for Ananda. And in Mumbai, in fact, is the places with the most energy are the places where you get devotees, because that's what you need to succeed on the spiritual path, or really even want to be on the spiritual path. So Google is more unique than some other companies because they've actually devoted a large chunk of resources into figuring out what makes a good Google employee. Google opens up, like 20 job openings and they'll get like 1,000 applicants. It's not as bad as the Indian Railways, where I heard there was like 20,000 and 19 million applicants or something. It was something, it was mind-boggling. But a lot of people want these jobs in Google. And so they have, to help their hiring process, they've made a system where they've tried to study their own systems to see how they can find who's going to be a good employee before they're hired. So what are the things that we usually think that are going to help us get a job in a job interview? What are the qualifications we think they're looking for?
Creativity.
Creativity would be one. If they're a good employer, they're going to look for creativity. Let's think more about the maybe the stereotypical. Maybe it's more enlightened now.
Unique.
Unique, it could be. Sorry? Flexibility. Okay, so you guys are already read in Education for Life. I don't actually need to give the rest of the class. That's good. The right answer is degree. Thank you, Shurjo. A lot of times we've conditioned ourselves to believe, even if we say creativity, even if we say flexibility and to be unique, in the back of our minds, because it's pervasive in society, we actually still think, or a lot of people think, let's say, we need to have a degree from the right school. We need to have the highest grade point average. We need to finish first in our class. Someone told me a story in Delhi when we were up there a few weeks ago of they were a student and they said they knew somebody who finished second in their class, and not just in their class, but in their whole state, I believe. It was a big area. She did not get into the college program that she wanted because she was not first. That is incredible to me. But also, it's like I hear that story or some variation of it all the time. I've been hearing it for years, and not just in India, although it is particularly focused in India. I heard that some people wouldn't be able to come to this class today because exams are happening now. And that exam is a whole family affair. It's not, why leave it to the kid to do? The parents in there, make sure they're fed, sit there with the ladus, just making sure they have enough sugar. Are your glucose levels okay? They're checking the readings, your pulse is okay? You study, I'm taking your pulse. So it's like it's like the focus of the whole family. So something that important, there must be some belief on our part that if they just know the right facts, if they do well on the test, then they'll be successful in life. And on some level that's true, because if you are number one in your class, that will look good on a job application. But will it make you happy? No. Maybe not. It can. I had a friend in my high school who was valedictorian. Her name was Tracy Chow. I don't actually know if she's happy. I don't know her that well, but she seems happy. Because she actually made national news because she scored perfect scores on the SAT, the ACT, and the SAT-2, or a couple of them. Just amazingly bright. But she was also a kind person. She also knew how to have fun. She also knew how to relax. So there's always a balance. So when I talk about focusing on being number one, that's not a problem in itself. It's the attitude we bring. So we're all focusing on being number one. We're all trying to reach self-realization. There is no higher grade than that. And we know that it's not going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of focus and work and determination. Those are all amazing things. But when we get to the point where we're no longer thinking, I'm doing this because it's making me a better person, or because I enjoy it, or because self-mastery is important to me. If I'm only thinking I need to be better than other people, I need to be the top of my class because then I won't be the bottom of my class, I won't be like those losers, I'll be a winner. I will get the job I want, I'll get into IIT, which I've heard is a good thing to do. This is top something you want to top school. Then that's where it gets twisted, and that's where we stop having fun. But first I want to get into what Google found after years of study. They gave it a cool name, like Project Awesome or something. I can't remember what the name was. But they gave it they really devote a lot of attention to this. And this, after years of study, this is what they found in their research. GPA is a non-factor in success. Grade point average, excuse me, I forgot. That's not so you add up all your grades, basically a 4.0 is all A's. I don't know
Marks,
Marks, okay. Sorry, mark point average. But basically, grades, marks, are a non-factor. Not that they aren't so important, but they have found that they're actually a non-factor in success. The grades, the marks that they've seen across the board of their most successful students are completely all over the map. So there's something missing, right? That we think that if we just learn all of the things and do well on the tests, and let's be honest, how much of us remember what happened on that test 20 minutes after we took the test? We're amazing at filling all the things into our head for a very short period of time. How useful of a skill is it to be able to learn something for like an hour? What about if you need it in an hour and a half? Oh no, sorry, that's gone. I studied for that earlier, it's gone now. So they have found that the most successful people are people who concentrate on other things, which are on the list. One thing they talked about is cognitive ability. Now this is something that they describe as being able to learn. Because as we've already established, the jobs of tomorrow, or let's say the jobs of today, are not what they were being prepared for in school. They didn't know C++ or Java, or I actually don't know that much about computers, sorry. I shouldn't have gone into this. Those languages, those came after. But it was the people who were able to adapt and learn those languages, and then not only learn the languages, but then apply them. And that's where the idea of creativity is so important. And in fact, it's one of the things that they have essentially. Are you able to take the knowledge that you have gained and turn it into something more? Because so often when you standardize education, the problem that you get into is that you're trying to find the best thing for a class of 30. Or if you expand it, a class of like, what, 1/3 of a billion? How many students are there in India right now? Like hundreds of millions. Yeah. So you're trying to create a system that will help all of them get a little bit forward. But the problem with that is that everyone is different. Every single person in this room is different. Even when you learn yoga and the teachings, the reason Master said, take 1% of what I say, do that and you will find God, is because he knew that you were all different. Everyone's 1% is going to be a unique amalgamation of all of the things that he said and told us to do. It's the same with any kind of education. When we give this broad thing, people will take the parts that are meaningful to them, and they will do with them, hopefully, they'll be able to create a successful life out of that. But the problem is when you only give academics, math, science, even literature, even sometimes art. I don't know how art is doing in Indian classrooms. In America, it's basically gone. We've eliminated art, science, even geography. And then you see, I don't know if you've ever seen, some of our late night comics do this thing where they go on the street and they ask people questions. I mean, it's kind of, yeah, it's also like a little, you feel bad for the people because they edit all the bad responses together, but you see people not being able to find like Missouri, state in the United States, on a map. They can't find India. They can't find countries that we're currently at war with. Things that are somewhat important for at least understanding, because the goal of education really, and I'm going to say the goal of education is many times, so there's lots of goals of education, but in this case, the goal of education as defined by our gurus and as by people who are basically can see the entire picture is expanding awareness. So we can teach academics, we can teach all of these things, but the goal of education, the goal of really all of us growing up, even now, I mean, we're all being educated. That's why Education for Life is named that, because education never stops, is to expand our awareness, to be able to understand other people's realities. If you saw the little flyer that went out for this talk, the quote that I chose was one of the core quotes from the book Education for Life. Maturity is the ability to relate to the realities of others. I mean, that's pretty deep. To someone out walking on the street living a normal, let's say, worldly life, that might not seem like that big of a deal. But here it is. Emergent leadership is basically teamwork. This was on Google's list. They need to be able to work as a team because nothing gets solved on your own. There is no company out there of any real, I mean, you could maybe have a one-person company and they're just a teamwork with themselves, but basically all companies have hundreds of employees, thousands of employees. Some of these have probably more than that. And they rely on the ability to work as a team. And to work, how do you work with someone? How do you work with your family? How do you work with your friends and coworkers? On some level, you have to understand where they're coming from, or you can't go anywhere. So a lot of the problem in education is not that what they're doing is wrong. They're teaching the things that they're teaching well, but they're only teaching a small part. It's as if in level 2, if some of you are going to take that this afternoon, or maybe it will be other people, they teach energization exercises in pieces. You do the first 10 exercises the first class, and then there's another 10 and so on, and you've all taken it. So, I imagine. So what if you just come to the first class and then you don't come to any other classes? You have these 10 things, but they're just a piece of this whole. And you all know that that last energization exercise, double breathing with no tension, is the best one. It's the one where they all come together. And so what if you just learn those first 10? Your entire life, you're just doing those first 10. And you're wondering, wait, why is this only kind of working? Why am I only getting a little bit better? Why am I not able to actually find the things that they said I could find? Success, happiness, maybe peace. They don't really talk about peace that much in schools, but they should. Humility was something that they also talked about, is on the list. Humility basically is defined by Google, the ability to learn from your mistakes. So I'm tying it into the Sunday service talk. So people who felt that they were right basically were unable to, when they reached a problem, when they reached an impasse, they were unable to get past it. They were unable to sort of, or take ownership of it, the biggest thing. Because as Shurjo and Ariani were talking about, the biggest part about mistakes is taking ownership of them and then moving on. As long as you hold the mistake away from you, it's going to follow you. It has to pass through you and make you better. And that's where Google has found that their most successful employees are the people who are like, whoa, I totally blew it. That was such a dumb idea. But this other thing could actually come from that dumb idea. Google funds huge projects, millions of dollars on things that will never see the light of day, that will never work. Because they've realized that by investing that money in mistakes, and even things they know will fail, they learn all of these other things. Even if you look at NASA, so much in America, NASA is kind of a punching bag for some people because it costs all of this money and we're just going to space. What's the point? So many of our technologies have come from NASA research. Simple things like different kinds of rubber. I mean, our tires on all cars are somehow connected to research they did in the 60s during the space race with Russia. You never know where the big leap is going to come from. So many of the ideas that have come out of Silicon Valley now and out of all these entrepreneurs are from things that you couldn't have even seen coming, like virtual reality. Who thought that was going to be a thing so soon? I thought I might see it when I was 80 when I was a kid. Now I have goggles at home. I can just stick my phone inside. I'm in a completely 3D world. That's now. And it's actually a few years ago. I'm usually behind the times. So the question is, how can we prepare our children for the world that they're going to find? And the real answer to that is on making personal development the core of our curriculum. So in a typical day, I would teach history, science, math, PE, film, maybe a philosophy class. So all of the sorts of things that you'd expect. We'd also have a personal development class. And that was a class that was dedicated to who are you now as a person and who do you want to become? And getting them to think about that, because a lot of the problems in our society are built around the idea that we're not even taught that you should think about that. You know, you're fine just the way you are. That's a nice idea, and it's true that you should accept where you are, but like, are any of us fine until we're perfect? Like, we're on a path, on a trajectory, hopefully, that's going to take us to complete perfection. And even people who don't believe in God or samadhi or any of the things that we know should still at least be able to reach for something higher. Be able to see what is their higher self. It's a spiritual school because all of the people who teach there are yogis, but we didn't talk a lot about God, but we would talk about higher self. Because that's something that everyone basically can relate to. They even ask in job interviews, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I wonder how many people say samadhi. But it would get you a job at Ananda. So, but where you see yourself in 5 years, where are you going? Because they want even to see that you have a goal that you've set for yourself. And that's one of the key things that we do in Education for Life. Consciously, when they're older, I taught in high school, you aren't necessarily going to take your 5-year-old and say, what are your goals? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Be like, I don't know, Disneyland? Hopefully, candy? Will there be candy? Age appropriate, but finding ways to help them expand their awareness and see forward, see where it is that I am going, where do I want to go, helping them then to raise that another octave, because we always, almost invariably, set our goals too low. We always say, okay, in 5 years I want to get promoted once. You should get promoted 5 times. You should be, I've already left this business and started your own business and be a multimillionaire. Whatever it is. I mean, you can do that. But it's setting your goals high and then figuring out the steps that you need to get there. So when in traditional education, you're teaching, the math and the science. You're teaching basically for the test. In America, often the schools that do the best on tests get the most money from the government. This was an initiative called No Child Left Behind. The problem was it left all the children behind. It didn't work too well. Because what it did was it had all of our teachers teaching directly to the test. The problem is when you go job day one, they don't put a test in front of you. They say, hey, we want to reach more people. We want to invent a cool new thing. We want to make this thing 10% more efficient. How are we going to do it? B? Can I just fill in the B mark? No, we have to use critical thinking. And that's something that doesn't come automatically that we wish it would. So in our schools, we do all the same academic things, but the thing that Swamiji laid out in Education for Life, and I'll give you some concrete examples and also some tools that you can use with your children, in your classroom. Are there any teachers here? I should have asked at the beginning. Wonderful. In your classrooms, wonderful. They're here. But also in your own lives. And I think you actually recognize some of the things as being just actually stolen from yoga. Borrowed, kindly. And actually, why don't I just start getting that way, because it'll lead us into the rest of the thing. So one of the things that is the cornerstone of Education for Life is what I said earlier, progressive development. The idea that we are on a track, we're headed to someplace in our future, and that we have intermediate steps to get there. So it's basically based around these 3 main groups: light, ego active, and heavy. Does anyone recognize yet what's going on here? This is something I like to do with my students. You're in my class? No? Yes, the Gunas. So basically, the Gunas are our guidepost for where our energy is at any given moment, yeah? So we're trying to be, I'm going to use these terms, but light is sattvic, ego active is rajasic, heavy is tamasik, right? So we are always in one of these things, right? Sometimes we're feeling a little tamasik. Oh, we're lazy today. We don't want to do whatever it is. I don't really want to go to morning meditation. Borrowing from that. It's winter. It's cold, which I'm in shorts and a t-shirt compared to where we're coming in the snow. But I don't want to do stuff. Then comes the next stage, and actually I haven't written all the stages here because there are 2 very important middle grounds, which are right here in the middle: ego active light and ego active heavy. So on heavy, we have no energy. Literally, sometimes you'll see a kid come in and they're basically a puddle. You feel like you could sweep them up and they'll just go right out the door. They're coming to school. 8:30 is an awful time for teenagers. Really, they don't want to talk to anybody. They don't want to hear anything. Just let me be. So a lot of them show up heavy. And our job really, as educators in Education for Life, is just to get them to light. Like that's the whole thing. That's really, if you want to just say education for life is just this. Because the spiritual path is just this. Education for life is just the spiritual path applied to children, applied to education. There's really no other. So we get into the next stage. If we can bring them up to the next stage, we get into ego active heavy, or Rajatama. So in that stage is where we have, they've got a little bit of energy, the kids. They're able to sort of move a little bit, but they're pissed. They are not happy that you've gotten them awake at that hour, but now they're ready to fight back. And that's actually good. Master said that he preferred basically a sinner or someone, let's say, evil, to someone with no energy. Because at least the evil person has energy. If you look at like the most evil person you can think of, I usually use Hitler. He's a very big, easy, totally propagandized image that we can now use for whatever educational purposes we want. At least he can have some positive use. He would fall into this category, not this one. And when I taught the kids this, we would do things like this and look at the yugas, and they would always think that Hitler, Mussolini, all of these like dictators, maybe the British Raj, depending on how, I'm the son of Irish immigrants, or a descendant of Irish immigrants, so we're not so great with the British either, so it's okay. That's an old history. But even they would be up in here because they had the energy to go take over countries. They had the energy to, colonize America, but their intent behind it was to get stuff for themselves. It was selfish. Sometimes it was angry. Sometimes it was brutal, but it had energy. So when you're talking about going from heavy to ego active heavy, what happens if you ask that kid to meditate? Not happening. What happens when you ask yourself to meditate when you're in this space? Not happening. So what did Master give us to do before meditation so that we could feel energization? Energization, while it can be light or sattvic, for me, fills the role of ego active the best because it gets the energy moving. So much when we talk as teachers about like, oh, I had this problem with the kids today. Oh, the kids were like terrible today. What did you do? Oh, we went for a run, or we kicked the ball around, or we played dodgeball. I just threw balls at them until they were awake, because sometimes that's what it takes. Education is a full contact sport. You have to be ready to get in there and do it. And I mean, all of you who have children, my hats are off to you, because at least I got to go home at the end of the day. You're out 24/7, especially with young ones. Sometimes you're up at 2 in the morning still dealing with this. So more power to you. So you don't use the light techniques on the heavy child. When they're in heavy, you try to just get them into ego active heavy. I even sometimes, and I'm not necessarily advocating this, you will not find this in Education for Life by Swami Kriyananda, but I would sometimes pick mock fights with my students. The ones I knew could handle it, I would kind of poke a little fun with them. I would kind of do their thing, oh, what are you doing? Because they would literally look like that. And so I would just mirror back to them what they were feeling. And with intuition, with attunement to where they actually were, if they had just had a little bit of Rajas in them, just a little glimmer, they would laugh. And they would actually sometimes even skip all the way up to something ego active light, where they would think it's funny. What will happen a lot of times is you'll see these little, like a little graph thing happen. They'll be in heavy, and you'll get them to laugh, and they'll go up here, and then they'll remember, wait a second, no, I'm angry. This isn't right. And then it'll drop right back down here. But not all the way back to heavy, thankfully. It is a constant practice of figuring out when they need energy and what energy they need, which is why basically for Education for Life, and it doesn't have to be an Education for Life school. This is really important. My dream with this, and I think this was Swamiji's dream, he said Education for Life would one day be bigger than Ananda. And the only way that that can happen is if we get into the schools. Because all Education for Life really takes, there are systems, there's curriculums, there's all these things you can do. There's tools and tricks, and I do recommend highly the book Education for Life. But all we need is teachers with consciousness, which we already have in this room. We need teachers who are already there to just become aware, to expand their own awareness. Because even in the system, we're teaching math, we're teaching science, we're teaching all of the same things, but we're doing it with consciousness. We're giving energy at all times. It can be very exhausting. I remember the story of Swamiji when he was still at SRF many years ago, and he was outside the church, and Master told him to shake everyone's hand, and at the end he felt completely drained. And that's how I felt the first couple years of school. I was completely done. Every day felt like I lived a lifetime because I had just been pouring out energy to try to get heavy kids to just be ego active heavy for a second, please. Can you just be angry? Like, yell at me. I don't know, do something, break a glass, like do something. I was pouring energy because I hadn't remembered that God is the doer. And that's really the core, is like education for life is most successful when the teachers they have a spiritual path. Almost all education for life teachers right now, I'm going to start using EFL as a shorthand, are meditators, or at least have some sort of spiritual path. In Palo Alto, where I went to school, now my dad teaches there, and they also have, so many of the people are from Ananda. My father is, the director, a couple of the other teachers, but we also have some people. We had one devotee of Amaji, we had one Jewish teacher, because it's not that these are at all, I mean, these are master's teachings applied to children for sure, but what are master's teachings? They're just Sanatana Dharma expressed again for Dwapara Yuga. So any reflective, deepening practice that can help you see a bigger picture is basically crucial for education for life, or for conscious parenting. This is what I think of as education for life as applied to parenting, just so that you can tune in, because so much of my day was figuring out what each individual child needed at that moment. And unfortunately, it was almost always different for every child. You can get into a classroom and be like, okay, this kid needs to like wake up. This kid is already like meditating, even though it's this like film. This kid, I mean, there's the whole spectrum. And you have to find a way to, on some level, grab each person and help them refocus their energy and channel their energy to something higher. We didn't talk as much about ego active light, but that is basically when you have energy and now you want to direct it to a higher course. So maybe you're not yet completely enthusiastic. I think of enthusiasm as sort of a fully light characteristic, but maybe you are enthusiastic, but in the wrong direction. So you're like, oh yeah, this is really fun painting, but you're making a sculpture. That's not what we're doing right now. But at least the energy is moving and they're happy about it, because so much of what makes a positive education experience is that they're enjoying it. I had a whole science curriculum once planned out. In my middle school, these are small classes at Ananda Village, in part because we're in a very rural area. There just aren't that many children. And so I had a class of maybe 6 in middle school for my science class. And one day, towards maybe halfway through the second term, they came up to me and was like, Brian, what, they call me Brian, what is at the edge of the universe? Like what is at the edge? I was like, well, space. And like, but what's beyond that? And I was like, more space? God? What are you ready for right now? But I saw the look in their eyes as being this like completely expansive thing. Space was always one of my favorite subjects because it's so naturally expansive. If you're ever having a bad day, just try doing the Google Maps zoom out from where you're standing. You can see yourself from above, and then just zoom out and out and out. You see all of Mumbai, all of India, all of the planet, all of the solar system. Your problems are really small. Like, when you can really see the perspective and think about how many people have lived and how many people have had problems before, all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, my problems aren't so bad, or they don't matter at all. This is the yogi's point of it, because if you don't have yoga undercurrent, under that you may have an existential crisis. But when you understand that God is behind everything and then you zoom out, all of a sudden everything feels amazing. And so what I did was I actually threw out the whole rest of the term and we just did space, because I saw in those students an expansion. And all I do as an educator in this school is chase expansion. Anything that will get them to expand their awareness. Now, just as an aside, one may think that this system is very sweet. You know, people are feeling good about themselves, they're getting happier. But what happens after? Our school regularly tests in the top 10% in the country, and we never even look at the test. I look at the test while they're taking it. I'm like, oh man, they don't know that, they don't know that. I didn't teach this. Oh, this is going to be a problem. And yet they still do well. Because when you can get yourself to light, and our students, you know, I don't have percentages on their lightness, but their marks are very good in light, mostly A's. You can actually start, they don't really always understand intuition, but they have it. And so you're actually able to feel where a test is coming from. There's a whole other aspect to education for life that Swamiji really did pioneer, which is the different stages of development. It starts with body, it goes into feeling, then will, then intellect. It's a 24-year cycle based partly on Jupiter. I mean, I don't actually, but when I read it, it's almost as if Jupiter was like the reflection of it. Like, you know, sometimes you discover something. This is science's strength. We discover something. Oh, there are 6-year cycles, and then we don't ask why. We've discovered it. We figured it out. It's done. And then someone's like, yeah, but why is that? And they're like, why does it matter? I said why. It's because of 6-year cycles. But in fact, the planets and the yugas and all the energy that's going on around us is always happening, and it's always influencing us. And so our first 6-year cycle, as Jupiter goes out away from where it is when we're born, is a time for focusing on the body. The next 6 years as it comes back is focusing on feeling. Then will, again, as you go out, and you can even see sort of these things going out and in, out and in. The body is a very outward moving thing. When you're learning in the first 6 years how to walk, how to run, how to play, how to move, how to like not fall over while we're walking, skip, all these things that involve like motor movement are like a very outward thing. And then after you've done this push out, now you have to start bringing it back in. The feeling, how does it feel? How can I become a stronger person because of my feelings? You know, we have, like I said earlier a little bit, I touched on the idea that we're encouraged to get in touch with our feelings a lot. In the West, you hear that all the time. And you have to just get in touch with your feelings as if that's the end. But that's actually just the beginning, because once we get in touch with the feelings, we're all going to have feelings. It's not like we teach someone, oh, you should have feelings right now. They have them. The education for life, the whole idea of it is that you want to focus your feelings. You want to channel your feelings. So one time, and this all kind of ties back into this, I was in Los Angeles. I was living with Swamiji, Narayani, Leela, everybody was all there. Jyotish and Devi were even there. And I was very new on the path. I had been really around for like 6 months, and I was living with Swami Kriyananda, which was a questionable decision. If ever there was one, I trust every decision Swamiji made, but I don't know how that one came out. In any case, I was going through a lot of inner conflict. I was very new on the path. I just started meditating. I knew that I loved Swamiji, and I knew that I wanted to be a part of this, but he moved me right back to where I went to college, around all my old influences and friends, and so there was this whole battle going on inside of me. And so one day, I was feeling really low. I was in a really bad mood. Everything was bad. Everything is dark. And I somehow blipped out of heavy just enough to realize I need to go for a run. I need to just like run this out because I'm just like upset and angry. So I put on my headphones because I was still listening to a lot of music back then. And I put on, I don't know if you are all familiar with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So they're not necessarily the lightest music group. Probably, I mean, depending on the song, this is the region. Sometimes here, probably. Not the most sought-after music, but it was above where I was. It got me, even if it was here, I started running. I was like, had the music in, I was like singing along or yelling. I was just like getting it all out. And at the end, I found that I felt good. I had processed something. I had directed my negative energy, my negative emotion into something positive. And that's the like core of EFL. taking wherever you are and channel whatever that is into something better, into whatever is going to bring you forward. And so again, you don't necessarily just sit down and meditate that moment, because then you're just meditating on how bad you feel. That's not going to get you very far. In fact, it'll get you even farther into heavy. And then you're in like a 4-week cycle where you're just like mad at everything for a whole month, and then that month's gone, wasted. So you keep moving. But what's interesting about that is another time later that month, let's say, I went for a run again, and I was really excited because I was going to get to listen to Red Hot Chili Peppers because I really like them. And I was like, oh, if I run, then it'll be okay. But I was up here, and it was down here. Crashed me right down. So all of it is about recognizing, helping students build awareness, consciously or unconsciously. You know, you're not telling kids, oh, this is light, this is heavy, you're being egoactive right now. Through trial and error, kids are sponges. And they're sponges for way more than we think. They're constantly aware of consciousness. They're constantly aware of energy on a level that probably we aren't anymore. We're trying to build that awareness back up, but they're born with it. And so if you show them by experience, if you're feeling like this, what can you do? There are stories of education for life classrooms, like in kindergarten. A kid will be having a bad day, and the teacher will say, well, what do you want to do? And the kid will say, well, I should move my energy. Because it's just like, it becomes second nature. And so at any stage, this can be helpful, but the reason why it's so good to have an entire length of time starting even at kindergarten and being able to go all the way up, or even just starting in the home with the family, is because we start to get into this automatic response. This should become automatic. I recognize a heavy thing coming. Sometimes you even see a mood coming, yeah? And you're like, it's moving in slow motion towards you, and you're like, I'm about to be really angry. What should I do? In that moment, we all know, if you like get up, energize, whatever it is that works for you to get yourself back into that flow, if you do that, you're out. And you just avoided this whole detour that you did not need to go on. And so much of what we do is working with energy first and everything else second. So the first comes consciousness, everything else is secondary. But that means that if you're talking about history, if you're talking about government, if you're talking about all these things, you find ways to build it into the class. So when I'm talking about history, I'm not just talking about, oh, this battle happened in 1812, and then they killed this many people, and then the British won, and that's good. I talk about, there was this hero, there was this guy who made this choice that you could also make. I mean, depending on how overt I can get, or maybe I'll just lay it out there. Oh, there's this amazing guy. Listen to all the amazing things that this person did. But actually, they were a normal person. They grew up just like you, and they did all these normal things, but they made choices that made them known to us now. We're studying him 200 years later. A core thing about Swamiji's plan for EFL was the studying of great figures in whatever field. So if you're studying music, you learn the technical, but you also learn about a great musician. If you're studying art, you learn about great artists, because just like we read all about the saints' lives and we read all about what the saints said and what they did, reading about the lives of great people does the same thing. You start to absorb these great qualities into yourself. And so really it becomes this automatic thing. You don't spend all of this time. You know, we talk about World War II, we talk about Hitler, but we also talk about the heroism. We talk about why it's important for light to stand up to darkness, why you shouldn't just let darkness take over. Because when you let darkness take over, you become dark. And if you really know from a young age what you want, what you feel the best, what energy you want to have, what kind of life you want to live, then all of those micro choices that you make every day that you don't think about start to take on more meaning and start to direct you even farther. And all of a sudden, that crazy 5-year plan that you made has come true, or you've even surpassed it because of all of these little choices. You know, the minutes are more important than the years, Master said. It's all of the little things. So when you train children from a young age to be aware, to have high energy, good energy, to see life as something to be welcomed, the challenges as something to be welcomed, then they turn in automatically, and then you send them off and they turn into successful people. Because what is, at the end of the day, true success? It might be a good job. It might be having enough to support your family. That's definitely good. But it's how can I be happy? How can I be a higher version of myself? And that's the whole purpose of education for life. We've come to the end of our time, but I want to allow just a few minutes if anyone has questions to answer those. And then I'm also, like Narayani and Shurjo said, here for about a couple weeks, and I'd be happy to meet again with a smaller group if you're interested in hearing more about this or have any other in-depth questions. But thank you very much. Are there any questions before we break up? Or you can also just come to me afterwards informally. I'd be happy to stay and talk with any of you.
It's fascinating. When I first went to America and saw what Swamiji created, and especially education for life, as a system and how it helps the kids. I went to Palo Alto School, and in fact your dad was explaining us what you guys do there daily with those kids, the kind of games they use to bring that awareness, as Aryavan was saying, to help them to experience how you feel when you help other person, how you feel when you take from other people. I mean, fascinating games and ways that Education for Life is helping children to become really wonderful human beings. Every child that leaves Education for Life system and goes into a regular college or company or school or job, they become leaders because they have something unique that no one else has. So anyway, I would love, if any of you are interested, even next week or the other weeks, to have a little time where they could share, or he could share a little bit more, the kind of things they do with kids and how they approach to every stage of a child, from 5 to 6 years old, how they do, from 6 to 12, 15 years old, with teenagers, how do they work with them? Because it's really fascinating with what you guys are doing in the school.
It's very inspiring and interesting to see this aspect of education. So I have bought the Education for Life book and the other books which Swamiji has also written and Nitai has written about, and I've read, and I feel really happy to have a class one-on-one like this with Aryan, and I would be happy to attend more such classes to understand how we are applying it in a practical way. For making them I don't think it's related only to children or teenagers, it goes beyond. I think age is boundless. It would be wonderful to learn this and apply for my own self, even the game techniques or whatever that is.
But he wanted to speak also about conscious parenting. And it's just, we are short of time, but that's another subject that would be worth exploring.
If you could talk a little bit about the personal development aspect, because you teach all the subjects, and personal development I feel is more important than everything else.
Yeah, so our school is unique, the high school is unique because you can sort of set aside time. They're old enough at the point where they're 12 to 18 is the will years section, and they're old enough to sort of attack head on what it is that they want. At a younger age, having a class just for personal development might not work, or at least outwardly. And so the kinds of things we do, in that class, I used to talk about, we would learn about saints, we'd talk about saints or great leaders, we would play games. There's different thought exercises. A lot come from Japan that help you sort of like see your subconscious tendencies. There are the life skill charts that Nitai has made that are really wonderful for all ages. Adults have really loved them, actually taken them on more than Nitai even thought they would. There's
the yamas and the niyamas in a very interesting way.
Exactly. And then we teach, Ashtanga yoga, we teach Raja yoga sometimes, we teach, we can get a little bit more explicit, and depending on the group that we have, when I arrived, we had, I was really blessed. We had just an incredibly deep spiritual group. They, a lot of them would meditate on their own. There was just like a lot of awareness that this world was illusory. And when you have that already, you can go really far. But if it was a different group, I would, concentrate on like, what are the qualities that you want to have in your life? When you see somebody that you respect, who's your hero, what do you love about them? What do you think is so amazing? Why do you think that they're different than you? Why do you think that you can't become them? And you lay out, you go in, we would maybe do a project where they studied that person's life and like go from the very beginning. Because a funny thing happens when you study a great person's life, you see that their childhood was almost always like yours. I mean, there's different, the names are all changed, but they were children. And they were teenagers, and then they were adults. And at some point, they made a conscious choice. I want to do something really great, or I feel that I'm here to channel something really great. And when you really understand that great people are not different than you, they're people who just made choices, and that you could do the same thing, you empower children and teenagers especially, because teenagers now are getting the energy is being able to be directed through the will in a way that they haven't been able to do, and they're ready for action. A lot of the rebellion we see in teenagers is because they're not given enough space to really do. They're ready to start changing the world now, and maybe they can't do it all right away, but they want to start and they want to do it now. So in our school, a major component is service. We'll go do service projects. We make sure that every week there's some aspect of giving back to the community, giving back to something outside of yourself. And in that's often the favorite thing that we do in a class for some of the students, because you go to a veterinary clinic, you get to help animals, you go to a food line, or food, a homeless shelter, and you get to feed people who don't have food. These are things that open up out of this bubble. I think sometimes we feel we have to protect our children a little too much, and for sure there's an appropriate time for everything. And when they're really young, you don't want to just like throw them out into the road and like find a way home. Fun side story: Nitai Sacramento is a city about 100 miles away from Ananda Village, 160 kilometers, and he took his middle school class there once. He drove them there and he let them off and he's like, see you later. And they had to find their way back from Sacramento on public transportation all the way back to Ananda.
Did he do the same thing in like Peru?
Yes, in Peru they landed, so we also do service adventure trips where we go to different parts of the world. So we've been to Peru, Costa Rica, Hong Kong, Nepal. I took some kids backpacking in the Himalayas last year. So that there's a space for them to really like challenge themselves, because when they see what they're capable of, they realize how much more they can do. So in America, high schoolers aren't allowed to work. They're not allowed to like be on their own. Sometimes they can get their driver's license, although they've just taken that away. So now you have to be 18, which actually is probably a good thing because they're really irresponsible. But giving them opportunities with public transportation, or just being able to go and do something that's completely theirs. And so that's where a lot of the personal development comes. So in that class, we do different things. We talk about philosophy, but personal development, it's just to give focus to what they're doing outside of the classroom in just their normal lives, what's going on inside of their head, so that they can start building that awareness then, so that when they go out into the world, they're ready. Make sense? Yeah.
One last question.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, so I basically want to talk about like now, and let's say that this kind of system doesn't exist in India and Bombay. So most of the kids of a younger generation, they are going to school where everything is standard and there are tests, there is competition. And the only way for them to judge how good they are is when they compare to other students, and I got 5 and they've got 15.
Sure.
And plus nowadays I see, like, my mom's a teacher, so I have a lot of students home. So they're always commenting that, oh, you don't even know this and I know this. So I mean, it just leads to the child feeling not good enough. So how do you deal with that?
So that is a huge challenge, and it's like it's the lock that if we can unlock that, society is just fixed in one generation. I think so. One of the reasons why having a school that's based on this is so amazing for a child is because environment is stronger than willpower, and we are infused with the vibration of wherever we are, and then we become that. And so even if you want to not care about your marks and you want to not care about being number one in the class, you're in an environment that's built completely around, or at least maybe many of the students, many of your friends are like, oh, I got a better grade than you, I did better on this than you, I know this and you don't. And it makes it extremely difficult for a child who's in their formative years to not get influenced by that. It's a side note, very ironic how much we stress out about those things, because science has actually showed that our brain cannot actually process information when we're in a state of stress. That our brain responds the same way to stress on a test as it does to being chased by a tiger. And you can't learn in that moment. You're in fight or flight. You're either going to fight the test or run away from it. And you fight it and you do the thing, but it leaves very little with you. So for parents who have children, or just for children that are in a system that is not built around higher values, essentially, it's important to give them as much as you can at home. But unfortunately, it has to be in a non-attached way, because their environment, especially as they get older, becomes everything. Their peer group is going to be their major influence. And so there is going to be a period where they might be influenced by that. And it's our responsibility, whoever we can influence, to sort of just give space and keep reminding. You know, we hear a lot of the same things. You know, you go to enough classes and satsangs, you know, you'll hear, if you went to see Swamiji in the last years of his life, you'd hear maybe some same stories or some same thing, but for some reason it's on the 35th time that it finally clicks and you understand it completely and you're like, I've never heard that before, even though you've been hearing it always. So parents, just giving a little bit of a reminder regularly. Oh, you know what, that actually doesn't, you know, that's, the grades aren't everything, marks aren't everything. Actually, I think you did very well. Honestly, I'm proud of you no matter what happens. Like, I want you to concentrate on being happy, but not in a way where like you feel when they reject it the first time that you feel bad, because they will. Or they won't get it, you know, but if you just keep giving, I mean, really, it's love. All of education for life is that we are giving love to the kids. And as long as you're giving love and supporting and doing your best to keep a vibration, at least at home, of support, of nurturing, of those things are all secondary. All those things are transitory. I mean, you wouldn't use this language, but like, focus on, like, who do you want to be? Find their interests, the things that they love to do outside of school, and really feed those. You know, it can be tempting at this time to make sure that their extracurricular time is filled with tutoring and like more schoolwork and making sure they're doing all their homework, which is all good. But if they have a passion, if they love to dance, if they love to do art, if they love music, if they love just being in nature, feed that as much as you can. Find all kinds of excuses to make sure they do that, classes and outings and family, because whatever they're getting from that experience will be the thing that carries them in 10 years and 15 years. I mean, I didn't come onto the spiritual path until I was 22, which is early, but I was exposed to it from zero. So in a sense, I was a very late bloomer. I had these teachings all around me. I went to the school. My father was a light bearer. He was, you know, giving Sunday satsangs. And so I had the teachings there. They were ready to be grabbed, but I wasn't ready. But when the disciple is ready, the guru comes. So when the student is ready, that thing that's right for them, that supportive environment will come to them, and they will be ready for it then. So just give as much as you can, feed the things that they love, feed their interests, and be non-attached. And it can be painful to watch. Definitely, I have so much empathy for parents in a system, in a society that doesn't see value in morality and justice and kindness and sympathy and things like that. But if you build that space at home and build it for them and with them. I actually have one more thing I'd like to hand out, which may sort of help. I didn't print enough because... yeah, I will. Is that if I just pass and maybe every other person will grab it if you think you'll use it, but we'll definitely give you the graphic, which is actually much easier to read. But this is basically a chart of these aspects measured against different, I actually should have kept one though, so I can just, thank you. And I can also print out other ones for next week. But basically it's a chart that gives you the heavy, ego-active light of a bunch of different possibilities. Response to great people, work ethic, self-image, the different aspects of what it is to be a human. And it gives you what it looks like when it's that. So like the response to great people, the heavy response is to be intimidated or to avoid contact. You don't even have enough to like challenge them. You just don't want to look. I mean, it's like, I told this story the other day. When I first met Swamiji, he would look directly into my eyes for a long time sometimes. And for months, really, I could not return. I would look for a second, and then I would crumble under his stare, and I would look away. Like I couldn't handle, I mean, how can you handle that much love? Like really. But I was not equal to even like receiving it, let alone holding it. And so I would look away. And each time I noticed I was able to look a little longer, until the point where I remember I was able to hold the gaze until he was the one who looked away. And that was actually maybe the first like really proud day on the spiritual path for me. It was like, okay, I'm at least progressing. I went from heavy, I was intimidated, I avoided the eye contact of a great person, and eventually I became inspired, cooperative. I wanted to go wherever he was going. And so that's the sort of thing. So this sort of ties in though to your question. If you see any qualities in them where they could move to light, always just bring them to light in any area of their life. Find something that they can be light about and just put them there as much as possible, because they will become addicted to that feeling and then they will search it out. And eventually that light will get bright enough that nothing can squash it, nothing can vanquish it. And then their environment will change completely. They'll attract the right friends, they'll attract the right teachers, because all through the schools there are teachers that care deeply. There are students that have the appropriate vision of who they want to be. It's just a matter of increasing the magnetism so that they find them. And we will email this out.
Thank you.